Console wars are nothing new to the gaming industry. Competition can be great. It's how game companies are supposed to entice you into buying their consoles with games you can't get anywhere else. Or at least, that's how it used to work. Now it's just brokering deals on timed exclusives, or worse, console exclusive DLC from pre-orders. Yuck. But when you stop and think about it, console wars are a civil war of sorts. On the other end of the argument spectrum come the PC gamers, people who stand by the fact that the only true, real, authentic way to play a game is with a mouse and keyboard. This is why, of course, plenty of PC games are built entirely with mice and keys in mind. Over the years, Steam has come along and slowly built the gap between consoles and PCs, with games now integrating gamepad controls natively. It's certainly nice to be able to use the same controllers for systems you already have on games that can look and play even better than the system the controller is intended for. But in doing so, there's a huge chunk of games that still don't support controllers in any form. Plenty of folks have come along and tried to find solutions, and while some work, a lot of times it's a lot of effort for little reward. Valve believes they may have created the final piece of the puzzle, however, a controller that will work with every single game ever released on Steam, possibly any game released for the PC ever. Aptly named the Steam controller, this wide-eyed owl-looking thing is arguably one of the most ambitious projects gaming has ever seen. That ambition has some gamers a bit scared off of dropping money for what is ultimately an experiment. Thankfully, the Steam controller does what it promises, by providing a controller that you can use for any game in your library, as long as you have the time for it. When you first look at the Steam controller, your eyes are immediately drawn to the two huge touchpads on both sides of the controller. You'll also notice that part of the controller's face is surrounded by a glossy edge. At the time of this review, I just got this thing, and already it's got some dings and scratches. If you didn't hear me say it in my new 3DS review, I hate glossy anything. A controller is a terrible place to have gloss, especially when it's going to go places. Whatever, at least your hand feels natural when holding this thing, similar to an Xbox 360 controller. The main four face buttons are nicely placed and reminiscent of the Wii U Pro controller, though I find myself stretching my thumb a bit to hit the X button sometimes. The analog stick works well, though I almost wish it was swapped in place for the left touchpad, since the majority of games use the analog stick for movement, which is understandable. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The top contains two bumper buttons, which are pretty big and surprisingly harder to press than expected. You'll notice this in games like Just Cause 3 that rely heavily on the top bumpers. The 360 controller has these buttons a lot smaller and with more give, something the Steam controller could have used. On the back there are two analog shoulder buttons. These are pretty shallow, and I find some games don't distinguish between them being clicked in and simply being pressed. Think of the GameCube shoulder buttons, just with less give. Finally, the back two paddle buttons are part of the battery cover. These two paddles are typically mapped to the jump buttons for games, and they work like a dream. The first time I used the paddle buttons to jump was when the controller really clicked for me, because despite a few design flaws, the Steam controller works very, very well. The touchpads are the number one thing that distinguishes the Steam controller from any other controller on the market. Both pads use haptic feedback, which for some of us doesn't mean too much. In layman's terms, think of the touchpads as two trackballs underneath your thumbs, because that's exactly how the right one works. Flick your finger and the controller continues to rumble below the pad, as if you sent a small ball rolling. The feedback is instant, and I found that using it was just as natural as using a mouse after a short period of time with it. The left pad works very similar to this, however it has a large D-pad ingrained into it. The functionality of the left pad typically works like a D-pad on a normal controller, switching weapons or navigating menus. It also will function as a normal D-pad for 2D games, though while it does work, I don't think I would recommend it. The Steam controller shines most when using it with shooters. Aiming, gunning, and strafing with this thing is a breeze, and in no time at all, I was flying all around the map in Just Cause 3, causing all kinds of mayhem. It should be noted that while the right pad is infinitely better than using an analog stick for games that use a mouse to aim, it isn't quite as good as aiming with a mouse. I found the benefits of the controller to outweigh the negative, but that may be a deal breaker for some. Games that have controller configurations built in typically work best with the Steam controller. However, some do not allow the use of a controller and mouse at the same time. Valve has gotten around this by adding in several different pre-made templates for the controller. If a game does not allow the player to use a mouse and a controller, the right pad can serve as a fake analog stick. The reason this becomes an issue is the touchpad serves better when it can work as a mouse. The analog stick function works, but it's nowhere near as precise, and you'll be wanting that mouse functionality back. This isn't usually an issue though. Popular games tend to have configurations built for them by users that work superbly, though they do highlight the one thing the Steam controller demands: your time. The Steam controller is, in its current state, not for people who want something to plug in and run. I spent plenty of times with games I got it to run in, tweaking the sensitivity of the mouse to be not too fast, but not slow either. Something that Valve tries to carry from game to game, but typically this has to be changed in-game by the user. The templates Valve has provided will work in most cases, but older games will require you to spend time deciding what key goes where and for what function. The level of customization the Steam controller contains is a double-edged sword, but for people like myself, having something new to tinker with is part of the experience. I actually enjoy being able to tweak every aspect of this controller on the software end to get it just how I like, and if you're willing to give it time, you'll find that it'll bend to your specifications too. Beyond just shooters though, the Steam controller works well for other games if you're willing to, again, give it time. Platformers and other less control-heavy games work very well and take no time at all to get running. Everything I ran with this thing worked at best as well as a mouse and keyboard, if not better, and at its worst, as well as a normal controller. Ultimately, I was just happy to be able to aim well with a controller, and if you're someone who hates using sticks to aim, that's a major upgrade. There's one other feature to hit on that I figured I'd hate and wouldn't use: gyro. Motion controls are incredibly irritating in games, and when I game, I want to sit there and push buttons. It's the ultimate form of lazy interactive entertainment, so just leave me alone. But, to my surprise, the gyro in the Steam controller is used more than appropriately. Certain games, such as Just Cause 3, have you hold your thumb on the right pad, and the gyro kicks in. Moving the Steam controller around allows you to adjust your aim very slowly, which is useful for long-distance shots in games like Left 4 Dead 2. And it also allows you to use the controller like a steering wheel in games like All-Stars Racing Transformed. While the second isn't my cup of tea, being able to have an easy way to slowly move your crosshairs like you would with a mouse sealed the deal for me. The Steam controller isn't without its flaws. There's some design choices I would maybe do different, which we already went over, and while it's a nice controller, the stick feels a bit cheap. That doesn't bother me much, but there needs to be something done about the setup process. Just a heads up, if you purchase this thing, your unit is not broken, but it will take its sweet time to connect to the dongle for the first time. Of course, this is after you wait for what feels like an eternity for that stupid dongle to download all of its drivers, fail out, download them again, and then decide to work. The first time setup really sucked, but once it managed to connect and run for the first time, I never had any other connection issues, and that includes hooking it up to my tower after setting the controller up on my laptop. If you're like me and have moved your PC gaming to the living room, the Steam controller is worth looking into. It's not the final answer to controllers being on par with mouse and keyboards, but it's a great start. If you hate using analog sticks to aim, or if you don't have a 360 or PlayStation controller, or you just want to breathe some life into some old games, check out the Steam controller. With consistent updates that make the controller progressively better, all it asks for is your time.